Welcome to the lesson 41 for 6th grade. Today we're continuing a comparison between decimals and fractions and percentages, and as we look at that comparison, we want to start using these numbers then in different types of problems. Today our focus is to working with percentage, and the first thing we need to look at is how do we take 15% and write it in decimal form. Because we know that 15% is out of the total of 100%, we can easily see what the fraction is. And then from the knowledge that we've gained of how to read a fraction, that this really says 15 hundredths, we can now change that to decimal form of 15 hundredths. And by doing that, we can see the relationship between these three ideas: the 15%, the fraction, and of course now the decimal. The second example says, looking at the idea of 60%, right? The other way we can think about 60% is 60%, right? If we divide by 100, right, or put it over 100, dividing by 100, right, gives us this idea, right? We have a fraction when we divide, but we also can just think about it like this now. Once we have that fraction, is 6 tenths, right? 60 hundredths is the same as 6 tenths. So now we've reduced the fraction a little bit so that our fraction is now 6 over 10. But now, of course, there is more reducing that you can do. You divide both by 2, and in the end we get 3 fifths for our reduced fraction. And so once again, we can start to see the relationship between all these different numbers. So how are we going to use this? Right? We're going to use this to help us understand how to find percentages of numbers. For example, it says what number is 60% of 40? Right, first of all, we have this keyword of here, which means multiply. Right? Don't want to forget that as we work through this. So the first thing we have to do before we can actually multiply these things is we got to change 60% into a number that we can actually work with. So we can either change it into a fraction, right, which we just solved and we found out that the reduced fraction is 3/5, or we can change it into a decimal form, which, as we also just did, we can see that that is 0.6. And so since we figured out what those 6% is, we can take either method to solve this problem. Now once we have this, now we have to choose which method are we going to use. Are we going to take that 3/5 times of times 40, or are we going to take 0.6 times 40? And this becomes a preferred method, whichever method you prefer when it comes to doing math, whichever one you think is going to be easier. Right? If we look at our first example, I'm going to actually just take this, move it over here real quick. Move that over there so we have room to work with. And as we solve for this, first thing we got to do is put 40 over 1. So that's 3 times 40, which is going to give us 120. 5 times 1 gives us 5. Now it's going to be 120 divided by 5. Which is going to give us an answer. 5 goes into 12 2 times. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 minus 12. 12 minus 10 gives us 2 remainder. 2 bring down 0. 20. 5 goes into 24 times. Right? A lot of mental math there, but hopefully you can see how that works, right? write that again this way. Execute division, you'll see that this is what we ended up doing. Alright, so we got an answer of 24. Right? If we take this approach, our other approach, we can multiply like this. Right? Easier to multiply in the vertical than the horizontal. Get rid of that. And so we ignore the decimal. 6 times 0 is 0. 6 times 4 is 24. Right? And now we add the decimal back in, one place value, right? One place value, one home. So our answer is 24. So both methods are going to get you to the correct answer. In the end, 60% of 40 is 24. Let's try it again. Says Alejandro went for a hike with his family. He hiked 80% of the trail and then turned around and headed back. If the trail was 12 miles long, how much of the trail did he hike before he turned around? Right? So we're going to be multiplying by 12, right? Of 12. Figuring out how much of the trail, and we know 80%. So step one is to take our 80% and turn it into a fraction. So that would be 80 over 100. And to reduce that, that would be 4/5. Taking a 20 out of both of them. Or I can take the decimal and I'll throw that over here, right? Which would be 0.8. So if we first start and we solve for this, we're going to take this times 12. 4 times 12 is 48. Divided by 5. And now suddenly we have a little bit harder problem because it's not really going in evenly, right? We can definitely rewrite this and we can have a fractional remainder. Okay. 5 goes in 45 9 times. We're going to have 3 left over, so we're going to have 9 3/5. Or if we multiply by the decimal, we're going to find out that if we take the, rewrite it real quick just to make it easier to multiply. Right, 8 times 12, 6, 1. 9. One decimal place goes back in, so 9.6. And so we have that idea. Both numbers are equal. The one is in fraction form, one is in decimal form. But as we've already studied this 3/5 in the last few problems, we know that 3/5 is equal to 0.6. So we know our answers are the same. So we're looking at that concept. The last idea that this principle really applies to has to deal with tax. And we can use tax to help us figure out how much money it's really going to cost to purchase an item. So it says the sales tax was 5%. Find the tax on an $18 purchase. Okay? So we're going to use this idea. So first thing, I'm going to take 5 over 100. That's going to give me a fraction of 1/20th. Or I can take this 5% and turn it into a decimal, which is going to be, 5 100ths. Which looks like this. And so either method is going to help me figure out what 5% of 18% is, right? We've got to find this of this when it comes to tax on an item. Okay? I'm going to use the decimal for this example, right? And I'll throw all my figures in here just so we can see everything. Right, ignoring the decimals, and we're multiplying, so we can go 0, 0, 0, carry the 4, 4 times 1, 9. Right, and then we're going to count the decimal places. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Throw that decimal place right there. And in the end, our answer is 0.9. However, we got to remember that we're dealing with money. And when we're talking about a 0.9, that's really this idea right here. 90 cents. And so we have this idea that we have 90 cents is the tax on this item. The second part of the question says, then find the total price including tax. So in the end, we got to take our $18 and we're going to add it to our tax, which is going to give us a total of $18.90. And we have final answer for that. So we have working with that. And of course, you could have done this all with your fraction also. To do it quickly, I could just say take 120 and times $18, right? I really don't need all of the decimals to put that over, so that's going to be 18 over 20, which is going to reduce to 9/10, which, as we look from here, the decimal form over here, 9/10 is just like what it's saying over here, 9/10, right? This is 9/10 right here. But because it's money, you have to add that 0 in there to help us understand. So it does work. Then I'm going to leave you with a sample problem and get my to work. There you go. Sample problems to figure out working with percentages and working with money in terms of tax and total price. This is lesson 40.